This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Undistracted. I'm your host, Laura Bennett, and this is the podcast where we learn from our guests how to be better at building our lives with intention around our passions, our purpose, and dealing with some of the stuff that gets in the way of it. If you haven't already, subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. Rate it, review it, share it with a friend, and you can check out video versions of many of these interviews on the Hope 1032 YouTube channel. Today's guest is debut author Pip Finkenmeyer. She describes her first book, Sad Girl Novel, as a self-aware skewering of early adulthood that taps into the trending sad girl genre to explore identity formation, friendship, neuroses, and what we look to for validation and meaning. For Pip, the book mirrored her own life in part, as, like protagonist Kim, she considered the evolving markers of adulthood and escaped to Europe in search of creative community and inspiration. Let's welcome Pip to the show as she explains why Kim's was the first story she wanted to tell as an author.
Well, I wanted to comment sort of on the books industry. So I have a protagonist, Kim, who's like a young Australian woman. She's writing a novel, which turns out to be a sad girl novel, and that's where the title comes from. And I had worked in bookstores for a long time. I also studied book publishing. So this is a way of like packaging up everything I learnt during those years and kind of commenting on it via my main character. So that's one reason. And then I sort of just landed on the voice of Kim first before any of the plot, because I tend to be driven by voice first. And I've always liked playing around with first-person narrators who are a bit like unaware of reality, like Kim's slightly delusional at times, but she like drifts back and forth between delusion and great clarity. So I just think it's really fun to write a character like that as well.
How much of yourself do you see in Kim?
I think when I started it, on the first page, Kim and I had a lot in common. It opens with Kim sort of sitting at her desk at her apartment in Berlin. She lives in the same neighborhood I lived in, and we're both working on a novel, but then from there we sort of diverged, and I made her into more of a character. So she's significantly younger than me. She's never like really written anything before, so she approaches writing sort of the opposite way that I do, where she just wants to like learn about what's popular and then try and write that. But there are similarities in our humor, I think, and I couldn't really keep that out. But I think as a writer, I'm like aware of the jokes, but Kim sometimes isn't.
Yeah, and there's something in the way you talk of her evolving from what you first started with to who she ended up being. Does that reveal something about your writing process? Like, do you start with this end picture in mind, or are you finding your way as you go a little bit?
I think I was definitely kind of taking it one step at a time, but it's kind of amazing how much things didn't change. Like, I remember writing the opening of chapter 1 for my writing group and just sort of like getting, writing 2,000 words, and then they didn't really change, and that sort of set me off on the path. But I think I'm very into first sentences, and so like I usually start with an opening line, and then the rest of the story is just about doing justice to that and how it unfolds. But Kim, I actually wanted her to be more of an anti-hero at the beginning, like more unambiguously someone we maybe aren't rooting for all the time. But then as I went through, I wanted people to, they don't have to like her, but I wanted them to understand her at least.
Yeah, and I think that's the balance. Like if a character is wholly one-dimensional, or only has this one side that we like, you're not going to, I think, relate to them in the same way, because all of us, whether we admit it or not, we do have these sides of ourselves that we probably don't like as much as others.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the point of fiction isn't to write a character that's beyond reproach. It's to write a character who's deeply flawed, so that we might recognize ourselves in them or not. But yeah, it's a lot more fun to explore these characters that are sort of transgressing social norms.
And in some ways, Kim very much is pushing back. She's pushing back on the expectations of her as a woman. She's pushing back on the expectations of her age bracket, her relationships, everything about how she fits in the world as a female. She seems to at least question. She doesn't blindly accept everything she thinks about it. Is that part of what you're trying to do with this book, feed that acceptability of questioning?
Yeah, I think so. I think the sad girl novel in general, like the protagonist is often someone who's not just sad, but maybe bad or maybe mad. So they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, especially as a young woman. It's a sort of rebellion, a very quiet rebellion. And I think that's why this type of protagonist has become popular over the last few years. And yeah, we're so like policed in our behavior in our everyday life that I don't think it's a surprise that we like fictional characters who aren't. So we get to like play around with that in the safe haven of fiction.
And this concept or the phenomena of, the sad girl novel, there's sad girl playlists, there's all sorts of things that come around this idea. Catch us up on that, because I know for those of us who are really into it, we're like, yes, we understand this niche. But what is the sad girl novel's role in the sort of larger space within, literary genres?
Yeah, I think they started around 2019. I think that's when they, like, some sort of niche sad girl titles started popping up. And then since then, they've just become super popular, probably because I think the pandemic and might have led to maybe more of an exploration of this sort of sad protagonist. But I actually don't think they're all that sad. I think for people that relate to them, they actually find quite a lot of joy in seeing them on the page. And there's also like a dark humor that's associated with the sad girl trope, even with musicians, I don't know, Phoebe Bridgers and people like that, who I'm not like, I don't know much about, but they're very funny. They're not just being miserable. It also precedes sort of the sad girl novel. I think, if it was a male character, it would just be called literature. Just because like young women, we want to give it a name, and it's kind of a flippant name, but you can choose to embrace it if you want to.
Give it some kind of framework. And you mentioned at the beginning that this was your response to having worked in the publishing world. You've worked in bookstores. You've kind of seen things from the inside. What was it that you were wanting to contribute to that space? What was the conversation that you felt needed to be had? I
think I wanted to show an aspiring writer at the very beginning of their career sort of experiencing literature as the intersection of art and commerce. So, like, it's very hard when you're writing. I mean, I write just for the process of writing and think about what the product will be later. But it's hard to sort of differentiate what you're doing from the market and, like, is there an audience for this? And what genre is it? And, at the end of the day, publishing is an industry that's trying to make money. So I think it's just really hard for a young writer to sort of fit into that. So that's what I wanted to show through Kim. And then, like, as someone who'd studied book publishing, I was like kind of nerding out about the Frankfurt Book Fair. I really wanted to set some of the books there and have her meet all these other publishing types and sort of comment on, which stories get taken seriously and which ones don't, and things like that.
And your own adventure in Berlin, you spent 5 years there. In some ways, that's kind of weaved into this. It's obviously where Kim's life is set, your love of trains reflected in some of her experience or lack thereof on trains as well. What were you doing in Berlin? What did that adventure represent to you?
I kind of moved to Berlin because I had always wanted to write and I had never really been able to find time here. I was just always working. And so I moved there because it's a cheap city. You don't have to work full time, and it's a lot of creative people sort of flock there. And so I was able to meet some other writers and sort of get started with writing. And then the trains, I just love German efficiency. And
yeah, it doesn't really reflect, it doesn't reflect as well on the Sydney train network or the Melbourne train network, but yes, Berlin is good.
Yes, exactly. And I find that using public transport, like whenever you're traveling or you move to a new city, it's just a way to kind of immediately experience a cross-section of society and see maybe part of the society that you're not really connected to, especially because in Berlin there's a tendency for all the English-speaking community to like stick together and just speak English, and then they're like real Berliners or the people that grew up there, they're sort of separate, and on public transport's when everybody mixes together and you get to like watch this sort of like weird combination of worlds. So I did a lot of people watching on trains in Berlin, which I think is reflected in the novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are certainly a lot of characters in Sad Girl novel that you bring to the picture. I haven't even asked you about Kim's best friend, Belle, yet. How would you describe her?
Belle she's a German historian, and she's taken a year off to have a baby at the same time as Kim is writing a book. So they both are sort of engaged in their twin accent creation. And I would describe Belle as sort of like that friend that you have who's way more accomplished and grown up than you, and you kind of seem like a mess compared to them all the time. But she's like very into productivity. She's very efficient, but she does need Kim and need sort of some of the spontaneity and joy that Kim brings. And she also enjoys taking care of Kim sometimes. She's quite motherly, and she's literally becoming a mother as well.
Yeah. Do you think that's what we look for in our own friendships? Like, do we need people that balance out our inefficiencies perhaps, or the spaces where we lack, and we find people that sort of fill those places? Or is it more that we look for people that are like us, that we have an affinity to?
Yeah, I think that sometimes we're drawn towards people that validate us, and Kim and Belle definitely validate each other to the point where sometimes they are sort of blindly supporting each other to the point where it becomes like a mutual delusion, and things start to get a bit messed up, and that's one of the plot points. But yeah, so sometimes you're drawn towards people, especially when you're younger, it's in a city like Berlin, who like people who are similarly deluded as you or similarly unaware of themselves. And then as you grow up, I think you're more drawn to people who have what you lack, so that together you sort of make up a whole that can navigate the world in a better way.
And there is a development of self-awareness that in part happens throughout this book. How do you think we build that in our own lives? What does it look like to become better at being self-aware?
I think it's very hard to be self-aware, and I think there's always a limit to it. You can never be fully self-aware unless you leave your body and watch yourself from the outside. Yeah, I don't know how you would. So Kim, I wanted her to be, she's somebody that's working very hard on self-awareness, and I would say she thinks that she is self-aware, but she has these massive blind spots, and I think we all do. And yeah, I don't know how you become more self-aware.
Well, it is a bit of a difficult question, because I feel like the idea of being self-aware is thinking about, hey, how does who I am impact on the people around me? How does the way I communicate perhaps affect the person I'm speaking to? But then on the flip side of doing that, you can then become super self-absorbed, which is not necessarily like the outcome that you're looking for, because you become really introspective.
Yeah, I think so. And then you become a bit self-conscious if you're thinking too much about every single thing you do. And there's a bit in the book where Kim is talking to a German character who's saying that, like, in German, to say someone is confident, you would say selbstbewusst, which translates to self-conscious. So, like, in German culture, to be self-conscious is to be confident, to, like, know yourself. But for us, to be self-conscious is sort of like the opposite of confidence. Like, there is a sort of cultural idea of confidence of someone that just sort of breezes through and doesn't overthink things. So it is interesting to think about how self-awareness and confidence go together. Maybe they don't, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. And in putting yourself out there as an author, writing this book, is that something you feel has fed your own sense of confidence, do you think? Or is it something that feeds vulnerability?
Everybody says that writing a novel is like a big act of vulnerability, and it definitely is, but I also feel, and I know that everybody's going to think that Kim is me, which is funny because Kim's like, pretty out of touch with reality, but I I don't feel that vulnerable because I know how much kind of craft goes into something like this. Even if it does seem like she's me, there's like a million sort of creative decisions that went into crafting the story and carefully plotting it. And confidence, I think for sure. Like, I wrote this whole book by, like, sort of off my own back, just doing it because I felt like I was compelled to do it. And I just thought, I'll just write this novel and then, you know, it probably won't work and then I can move on with my life and do something else. So I kind of was operating in a space where, and it's a big theme of the book as well, you can never really know what's happening and you just need to be okay with not knowing. And then I tried to make that the case with the characters as well. Like, you don't really know whether they're like geniuses or deluded, and it's hard to tell whether she's talented or not. And similarly with the book, it's like this huge long period of time where you don't really know whether it's any good or not. So the only thing you can do is do it for yourself. So that did give me a lot of confidence in that, like, I was really just aiming to make something that I was proud of, and now other people like it, of course, confidence.
And it is. I mean, it's a really good read, and I think it touches on some really universal things, even as you bring up this idea of control and what we can and can't control. Like, Belle faces that, even Kim to a degree, in their discussions, without spoiling anything, about, you know, the directions that our lives take, the elements that we have control over, that we can choose for ourselves, and then these really big things we can't control, like who we fall in love with or don't, when we meet a partner or don't. Like, there's these really fundamental parts of life that are important and that we value, and yet we have no control over whatsoever.
Yeah, it is true. Like, I think it's a bit of a farce to think that we can just choose, you know, leading up to 30, or, you know, Kim's in her late 20s, Belle's in her early 30s, that, you know, there are big choices to make around what path you're going to take in life. But a lot of the time the path sort of just unfurls itself for you and you just have to walk along it. But I think letting go of, relinquishing control is sort of a freeing thing for the characters in the book.
And considering where we get that idea of the timeline, where does this concept of you have to have this done by this time and that constitutes, you know, the quote-unquote perfect life, even that idea of what a perfect life looks like is something that they push back on as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like in your late 20s, it's a time when everything that happens seems to hold a lot of significance and seems like sort of life or death. But looking back, obviously everything was going to be fine the whole time. But it's just a time where, I don't know, culturally we put a lot of pressure on people around that age. And once you sort of pass through that age, I think it's super relaxing because you realize that you can just sort of do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah, you realise things don't need to be quite as intense as you think that they, you know, sort of had to be. And Kim makes this important distinction, I think, in her own life, what she's looking for in friendships, in relationships, to not necessarily have a likability, but a lovability. That contrast I thought was pretty striking. What would you describe as the difference between the two?
Well, I was trying to comment on, like, likable female characters, how, you know, I think we've moved past, like, I think we're very drawn towards unlikable women at the moment. But when you write a book, it's amazing how many people want to tell you that they didn't like the character. So, like, it's not, they don't mean it as an insult, but it's just being honest. And so I just put in a bit to be like, she literally says, I am not trying to be likable, just so that people know, like, it's okay if you don't like her. Like, I'm not going to be offended. She's not supposed to be likable. But I wanted her to be lovable because I think, yeah, when someone's deeply flawed and a bit of a bumbling fool at times, but also really insightful and intelligent, it's easier to love them. And also for Kim, I wanted to put in a bit of her motivation for wanting to be a writer. And for Kim, she equates writing with love, not necessarily like a romantic love, but this sort of belovedness that you get by society. And, you know, I think she might be deeply wrong about it, but who knows?
Yeah, and that need to be loved or adored in some kind of sense, that seems to be something that I think not for all women, but sometimes in a stereotypical fashion, that can be a real motivating factor behind our choices. I want to do this thing so that I'm seen a particular way. Do you ever think we can kind of get away from that? Will we always be in a position where we are motivated to do things because of how others will see us?
Yeah, I think people waste a lot of time with that in their 20s. I mean, no judgment, like I think I did as well. But you think that the thing that's going to change your life is meeting a particular person and them sort of opening up another world to you. And usually you think that's going to be a romantic relationship. And also, like, as an emerging writer or an aspiring writer, you really value external feedback more than internal, because your internal sense of self doesn't mean as much, which is, problematic, because you shouldn't really value the opinion of strangers more than yourself or people who are close to you. But when you want to be a writer, like, I know for me, when my friends liked it, that was nice. But if like a complete stranger liked it and wanted to publish it, then that was like what made me actually feel validated. But I think now I've been able to move through it. But I also think there's something very human in wanting to be loved, and that's definitely in the book. But love comes in like all sorts of different packages in the story.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's like we can have an expectation of what loving and being loved looks like, but it can be so much more broad than that. And we can meet people that we have unexpected connections to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a good thing that people are driven by love, because, it brings out Kim's best side definitely in the book. Like, that's how she redeems herself with her love for Belle, I would say.
And you've brought to the table, I think, a story that takes us into, sure, the genre of sad girl novels, but you do it in your own way, with your own characters, with their own kind of stories to tell. Are there certain kinds of stories you would like to see, whether it's in this genre of sad girl novels or beyond, that aren't quite there yet? Like, what stories would you like to see being told?
I think it's surprising how few books there are that are just about friendship, that don't also feature romance. I mean, my book does feature romance, and creative partnerships. Like, I just read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and that book is about a friendship more than anything else, and a creative partnership. So I think, I know for a creative person, meeting that person that helps you do what you want to do is really important. So I like those types of stories, and surprisingly, there aren't that many. I don't know. I also think there are so many amazing writers writing the most like unique and distinctive things. So I'm just waiting to read everyone else's ideas.
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? How many books have you got on your bedside table waiting to be read, or are they all stocked up on a Kindle somewhere?
I've got physical books. Yeah, I've got quite a few. So I'm trying to reread ones that I loved in my 20s, because I think when you reread a book, you can really learn how it was done, and you see more and more in it. But I just read Yellowface, which is by R.F. Kuang, and it's like another story told within the publishing industry that's basically a thriller, and it's also about race and who gets to tell stories, and that's so amazing. And because I've been going out to bookstores lately to sign books, I've been guilty of purchasing books everywhere I go.
You sound like you're like me. You just have this giant haul and you go, okay, I'm going to have to get through these eventually. No one show me a book. No one recommend me a book until I finish this one.
Yes, that's what I try and do. But I also have a few on the go at any one time.
Yeah, it depends.
It's not a good habit.
Depends what one you're in the mood for. But I mean, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, Pip. I really do encourage people to take a look at Sad Girl Novel. How do you hope they respond after reading it?
I guess I want people to feel seen, like people who are readers of the genre, and I hope that it's like, even though sad's in the title, that it's a joyful reading experience as well.
There definitely is joy in Sad Girl Novel, and a lot to relate to, especially if you feel like you're in a time where you're still figuring out your place in the world and how to get there. And I can't go past this moment without mentioning another podcast you might enjoy. If you love books, if you want to deep dive into that part of these conversations a little more, check out the Hope Book Club podcast with Simone and Georgia. It is for you. They explore so many different genres, characters, and some of the significance of storytelling for this day and age. You can find the Hope Book Club podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts and also on the website hope1032.com.au. Until next time, I hope you enjoy living this undistracted life.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.